Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 11, Individual Education of the Brotherhood of Man by J.E. Richardson TK. Chapter 11, Individual Education. There inevitably comes a time in the evolution of the individual intelligence and soul growth when its knowledge of nature's law and purposes is sufficient to emancipate it from the individual status of psychic infancy and irresponsibility and give to it both moral accountability and personal responsibility. When this evolutionary point is reached, the individual intelligence or soul has attained to a degree of personal knowledge and psychic development where he becomes a conscious and voluntary cooperator with nature in the evolution of his individual and soul growth. At this point, he becomes an intelligent and voluntary factor in his own individual evolution. From this point forward, he adds the impulse of his own voluntary and intelligent efforts to the effort of nature, and thus greatly accelerates the progress of his own individual development, until he reaches the point of psychic majority and emancipation. However, nature carries forward his evolutionary progress alone up to this point. Therefore, his evolutionary unfoldment is less rapid than it is thereafter, whence the individual adds the impulse of his own intelligent personal effort to that of nature. In the process of individualizing and evolving a human soul, therefore, it is of the most vital importance to the individual that he reach the point of psychic emancipation as early as possible, that he may therefore add his own personal effort to the impulse of nature, thereby increasing the rapidity of his own evolutionary unfoldment and development. This naturally leads to the question, what is nature's evolutionary process by and through which the individual human may attain psychic emancipation and moral accountability? There is but one. It is definite, simple, and direct. It is the education of the individual in a definite, exact, and scientific personal knowledge of nature's laws, to the point where he shall attain his psychic majority and thereafter apply his knowledge to aid nature voluntarily in his own soul growth. It is this education of the individual that becomes the center impulse and most uplifting inspiration of every individual member of the Brotherhood of Man, which answers perfectly the terms and conditions of our definition. It can now be seen with clearness and certainty that the great central and most exalted purpose, as well as permanent occupation of such a Brotherhood of Man, becomes that of carrying forward the great work of individual education as rapidly and perfectly as possible, to the end that each member of the Brotherhood shall achieve psychic emancipation and soul independence, which shall invest him with the knowledge and power to supplement nature in her evolutionary and unfoldment of individual intelligence by his added voluntary and intelligent personal effort to the full measure of his personal knowledge and power. Viewing the subject from the standpoint of the individual member of such a brotherhood, it appears that the logical, impelling, and inspiring impulse and inevitable occupation of each and every member of such a brotherhood is twofold. 1. Helping nature, by the added impulse of his own personal effort, to carry forward his education as rapidly as possible and attain the most exalted evolutionary individual unfoldment. 2. Helping those who are less developed than himself to arrive at the point of their psychic emancipation as rapidly as may be possible, that they also may add the impulse of their knowledge and voluntary power to the effort of nature in carrying forward the great work of evolutionary and soul growth. If the student and reader will make a careful and logical study of the outline of the activities of such a brotherhood, as has been defined, he can hardly fail to arrive at the conclusion that in the establishment of the Brotherhood of Man, such as has been outlined, elucidated, and defined, we have arrived at the point along the path of evolution where in human relations, competition has been virtually eliminated from the field of human activities and purposes, and cooperation has become the basic and central inspiration. Having achieved psychic emancipation and entered upon the cooperative endeavor to add the impulse of his own voluntary effort to the effort of nature in his behalf, the combined impulse therefore gives birth to what the world knows as altruism. It is the impulse to help his fellow man over the evolutionary pathway he has traveled, and give to him the benefit of the same education and evolutionary unfoldment that were received by him, and thus give to his fellows a full equivalent of the definite knowledge he has received. In this connection, a study of the working of the law of compensation will explain why the members of such a brotherhood enter with intense enthusiasm into the occupation of giving to their less advanced fellows the knowledge they have received from those who are yet beyond them in knowledge and unfoldment. It is because they have arrived at a degree of unfoldment, where to know the law is to obey it, under the law of compensation, having received in such generous abundance from their fellows, they know that they must give in equal measure to those who are following in their footsteps. As ye receive, so shall ye give. This is the law of life. Those who receive most must also give most, and the business of life is now that of receiving and giving. Those who receive the knowledge which the Brotherhood has to give know that they must balance the law of compensation by giving in equal measure to those who need what they can give. This will suggest why and how it is that such a brotherhood becomes a truly great educational institution. It will explain why it is that the utmost care should be taken to guard against mistakes in the methods of instruction to be employed, as well as in the curriculum of education to be covered. This latter must be such that it shall cover every department of constructive human character, every phase of individual evolution along constructive lines. It must not be limited to the facts of nature and of nature's laws upon the plane of physical life and knowledge only. Neither must it be limited to education concerning the facts of nature upon both the physical and the spiritual planes of life and activity, for that would omit the most vital of all the realms of individual life, namely, the realm of the soul itself. In other words, the curriculum of study necessary to meet the needs of the real Brotherhood of Man must be such that it shall cover a definite knowledge of the facts of physical life and physical laws, spiritual life and spiritual laws, and finally, physical life and physical laws, as far as these can be definitely unfolded to human intelligence, since nature fixes upon each individual intelligence the obligation to balance his account under the law of compensation. It follows that he must hold himself bound under the great law to pass on to his fellows the knowledge he has received. Hence, one of the most important objective points along the pathway of his own personal development is to qualify himself for the active work of instruction. Every student along the way should be made to understand and appreciate the fact that, so long as he occupies that status, he is primarily a receiver who must ultimately become an instructor before he can pass on the knowledge he has received, become a giver, and pay his debts to nature. This will suggest how important it is that each individual member of the Brotherhood of Man charge himself at the beginning of his real studentship with the responsibility of becoming an instructor fully qualified to pass on to others who need such help the knowledge he has received from his own instructor. This, however, is one of the responsibilities which many of the members are most reluctant to acknowledge and discharge. They put it off as long as possible, often because they feel themselves lacking in the qualifications of a good instructor, or in the ability to impart the knowledge they have so generously received. If such is the case, then it is clear that they have not completed the work of studentship, For no student has completed his course of instruction as such until he has taken the full course in how to instruct and proven himself duly qualified as a competent instructor. For then only is he prepared to repay his indebtedness under the law of compensation, by passing on his knowledge to those of his brothers who need and are entitled to receive what he has received and is ready to give in return. Thus, only is it possible for the individual to become a real member of the Brotherhood of Man. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. If you can, please consider donating towards the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.